Welcome to the Book of Hebrews Restored, Chapter 4, Session 4B. This session is titled, Abraham and Isaac. We have been breaking new ground in this class, a lot of new ground. I think you can agree. This is because the Book of Hebrews was fresh territory. Plus, we are employing additional hermeneutic tools from quote-unquote in the context and quote-unquote prior and other usage. Things like signpost words, structure, repetitions. Those things function as cross-checks to verify the information derived from the in the verse analysis. We've often seen that just relying on in the verse analysis, such as lexical and grammatical information only, can leave us with more than one viable option. Then we've seen supporters of the one option or the others take their sides and argue, but still there's been no clear resolution. But if those additional hermeneutic tools are allowed to cast their vote, I believe it can settle disputes once and for all. We've seen over and over that the writers of Scripture knew far more than just what they wrote. They absolutely did have a deeper understanding of things that peeked through the text like signals through the clouds. We need to recognize those clues. I've been doing biblical research for over 50 years. I've developed the habit of believing to find those signals, to resolve arguments. I expect that they are there because the basic nature of communication is to avoid ambiguity. The ancient writers were no less intelligent than we are today. In fact, because of their reliance on memory instead of what we rely on our modern devices, I think they had an advantage. But regardless, communicators inherently will embed signals in context to steer understanding in the right direction. The primary canon of objective analysis dictates that one cannot come to a passage with a predetermined opinion and impose it. That pre-existing opinion will, in the least, cloud judgment and may even cause readers to miss the clues that are right there staring them in the face. We have experienced those aha moments when we finally saw what was there all along. Well, how did we miss it? Often, it was because we were influenced by someone else's opinion. That is why my habit of analysis has been to analyze the evidence myself first. Then I will look at what others have thought and concluded. Sometimes they have seen something I didn't, or have been able to describe things in better words. Sometimes they're right, and I have to correct myself. I'm willing to sacrifice my pride. Sometimes they were incorrect, but I don't just shut them off. I try to understand why they concluded the way they did, because that'll help me convince others to not go in that direction. I also love to discuss such things with my research peers. The way I think best is when I write. So I write white papers on subjects and then send them out to get feedback. That's why I love our discussions before and after the teachings. Rarely, I've come to an impasse, not having enough information to feel confident of a conclusion. Well, what do I do then? Well, I put stuff like that in my future answers box. I believe that when I learn new things in the future, that they'll have a bearing on that subject and clarify it. Sometimes stuff has been in that box for years. But one by one, answers have come. Another common error is thinking and evaluating by modern means and not how the ancient believers thought. This brings up a very important point. I have observed that every single one of the research advisors to the former ministry quit. Wow. I mean, over the years, you can track it. Why was that? I now think it was because they were not allowed academic freedom. They were not allowed to dissent. If one were to analyze the differences, one would see that they were in agreement on a large percentage, 99%. But there was that one lingering 1% that was not handled properly, respectfully, lovingly, and the division grew from there. In my case, my research on the role of Christ at God's right hand and greater truths of the great mystery led me into things that the former ministry had no knowledge or official position on. And when things came to a head, I was accused because the inquisitor had never heard of some terms that I was using. Specifically, it had to do with, at that time, content, extent, and deferment, especially the extent, because I was using the word jurisdiction. And they seized on that term and blew it out of proportion. Well, no wonder, because I wasn't sharing my research with them. I was sharing it higher up in the ministry hierarchy. The inquisitor then commanded me to stop doing research. Can you believe that? For me, it was like being a fish out of water. Because of the spiritual abuse, I was confused and in clouds in a whirlwind. But you know what? It only took 2 weeks after I left that ministry and getting out from underneath that spiritual fog to be able to think clearly again. So I want to maintain academic freedom amongst my peers. Now, if they start talking about the Trinity, I get worried, but I don't think that's going to happen. Then the devil tried to take me out a second time with COVID-19. But thanks to God and your prayers, I survived being unconscious, intubated 21 days. Thanks to the Lord, my thinking ability was preserved, even though since I woke up, it's like my head was attached to a different body that had aged significantly. I have been fighting, believing to get that back ever since. My speaking voice was affected, and I've gotten most of that back. But my work was not done, and I believe that the Lord delivered me so I could finish it. So, now I'm fiercely determined to do so. Tonight, we're going to weigh 2 opinions, and I believe we will now be able to arrive at a conclusion. The groundwork for this was laid by the last session, in which we saw that there was a secondary theme which kept coming up in Hebrews 11 of rewards. Ren brought that out even greater tonight. They were looking forward to something. Look at Hebrews 11:13. Hebrews 11:13. These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, and were persuaded of them, and embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For they that say such things declare plainly that they seek a country. And truly, if they had been mindful of that country from whence they came out, they might have had opportunity to have returned. But now, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Wherefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he hath prepared for them a city. That's very clear. This expectation has a bearing upon what comes next in Hebrews 11. Hebrews 11:17. Hebrews 11:17. By faith, Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Isaac, and he that had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, that in Isaac shall thy seed be called, accounting that God was able to raise him up even from among the dead, from whence also he received him in a figure. If we recognize the second theme about rewards described in verses 13 through 16, which I taught last week, that expectation of rewards in paradise in the heavenly city by which they arrive at a resurrection, and then Ren taught even more about that. Verse 19's quote-unquote, in a figure, will come into better focus. I will present my findings about this by tracing their development in my positions chronologically. So I'm going to start with what I believed about this passage over a decade ago. While in the former ministry, I was employed at their international headquarters on their biblical research team. As part of our jobs, to defend the faith. We were watchdogs of the Word. We were all well informed of the ministry's doctrine, which was enshrined at different levels of authority. That which was presented at Sunday night services was one level. Magazine articles was another level. And in the ministry books and classes, that was the highest authority, the books and classes. Even after I left the research team, and after I left that ministry, I had maintained the doctrines and built on them. If there was any instance of diverting from that foundation, I was very conservative and honest, not being iconoclastic regarding my motivations. I do now differ, but it's not very much on that foundation. My main differences are in the additional things that were built upon it, those purple smoke things. They're not contradictory, but additional, more advanced. I found lots of exciting new things, and I keep finding more, in part because I think I can handle them properly and respectfully. Because one must stay meek and not allow the excitement of learning new and profound things to propel one's estimate of one's importance. One can't get that out of bounds, or the stuff will get cut off. Like I have repeatedly said, it's not my intelligence which brought these new insights. They often occurred instantaneously as epiphanies. So I knew they weren't from me. They weren't because I was so special either. So for me to differ on something in that foundation written in the books, I'd have to be very sure that I was right. And I'd have to give those whom I teach the latitude and time to weigh the evidence like I had to come to a conclusion. It has now come to that point on one subject. So please bear with me tonight. In 2019, I attended a covenant symposium held by the Spirit and Truth Fellowship, whose headquarters was 25 miles from my home. I had attended their yearly research seminars because I used to work with John Shainheit. He's a friend and a research peer, and we occasionally exchange research questions, etc., even though he and I differ on a few things. At the symposium, we had learned some things about Abraham, which reflected on this passage here in Hebrews. Prior to that, I had a different opinion about it than what they had. I had maintained what was in the Word's Way book, chapter 8, titled, quote, of human sacrifice. But after we reviewed the material, they were amazed at that meeting. Even though I had differed in opinion, they were amazed that I was willing to consider their position then. But that's what research mode involves. I live that. I eat and sleep and dream research. One must be willing to change in the face of better information. It's honest, it's right, and I'd rather sacrifice any pride in favor of being correct. But I must say that this difference is a minor subject, so I'm going to handle it accordingly. After that, in 2013, during the Old Testament history class on Tune In Tuesday, I taught about this, and I modified my former position saying, I know that there are two different opinions about this incident with Isaac. One opinion is Abraham misunderstood when God told him about the burnt offering, because there are two kinds of burnt offerings. One is the burnt offering we usually think of, in which something is burnt up with fire. The other kind of burnt offering is like what's in the book of Judges. Look at Judges 11. Judges chapter 11, verse 30. Judges 11:30. And Jephthah vowed a vow unto the Lord and said, If thou shalt without fail deliver the children of Ammon into mine hands, then it shall be that whatsoever comes forth of the doors of my house to meet me, when I return in peace from the children of Ammon, shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. That shall surely be the Lord's really is key here. Verse 32. So Jephthah passed over unto the children of Ammon to fight against them, and the Lord delivered them into his hands. And he smote them from Aroer even until thou come to Minnith, even 20 cities, and unto the plain of the vineyards with a very great slaughter. Thus the children of Ammon were subdued before the children of Israel. And Jephthah came to Mizpah, to his house, and behold, his daughter came out to meet him, with timbrels and with dances, and she was his only child. Beside her he had neither son nor daughter. And it came to pass when he saw her, that he rent his clothes and say, Alas, my daughter, thou hast brought me very low, and thou art one of them that trouble me. For I have opened my mouth unto the Lord, and I cannot go back. And she said unto him, My father, if thou hast opened thy mouth unto the Lord, do to me according to that which thou hast proceeded out of thy mouth. Forasmuch as the Lord hath taken vengeance for thee of thine enemies, even the children of Ammon. And she said unto her father, Let this thing be done for me. So he explained, she would surely be the Lord's, like he said in verse 31. Let this thing be done to me. Let me alone 2 months, that I may go up and down upon the mountains, and bewail my virginity, I and my fellows. Well, if she was going to get burnt up, that's sort of a strange thing to do before that. No, we're going to see what really happened. Verse 38. And he said, Go. And he sent her away for 2 months, and she went with her companions and bewailed her virginity. She was not going to get married. She was going to be dedicated to the Lord. And it came to pass at the end of 2 months that she returned unto her father, who did with her according to his vow, which he had vowed, and she knew no man. And it was a custom in Israel. Well, the result was she knew no man. Well, that would be axiomatic if they burnt her up. But she didn't get burnt up. She got dedicated to the Lord as a tabernacle servant. Verse 40, that the daughters of Israel went yearly to lament the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite 4 days in a year. So, Jephthah had said, after I win this battle, Lord, if you help me, then when I get home, the first thing that I see coming out of my property, I'm going to offer it as a burnt offering. Well, when he got home, he expected it to be one of his animals. Maybe there was one there that acted like a pet. But instead, it was his daughter. Whoa, Nellie. No. Nellie wasn't the name of the daughter. It was the name of the pet. But he didn't burn up his daughter, did he? No. He dedicated her to the tabernacle or temple. That's a second kind of quote-unquote burnt offering, to dedicate oneself to God as a servant. You know, Hannah did the same thing with Samuel. Look at 1 Samuel 1:11. 1 Samuel 1:11. She believed God to get Samuel as a son. She was barren before that. And in 1:11, she vowed a vow and said, Oh, Lord of hosts, if thou wilt indeed look upon the affliction of thine handmaid, and remember me, and not forget thine handmaid, but wilt give unto thine handmaid a man child, then I will give him unto the Lord all the days of his life, and there shall no razor come upon his head. That's the vow of a Nazarite. All right, now, being a Nazarite had nothing to do with Nazareth. Nazareth was the town that Jesus grew up in. But a Nazarite was a means by which talented and capable believers who were not Levites could serve the Lord, because the entire tribe of Levi had been dedicated en masse to serve for tabernacle and temple services. But the Nazarite vow was for members of other tribes to be able to join them. It's described in Numbers 6. Look at Numbers chapter 6, verse 1. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, When either a man or woman shall separate themselves to vow a vow of a Nazarite, to separate themselves unto the Lord, he shall separate himself from wine and strong drink, and shall drink no vinegar of wine or vinegar of strong drink, neither shall he drink any liquor of grapes, nor eat moist grapes or dried. All the days of his separation shall he eat nothing that is made of the vine tree, from the kernels even to the husk. All the days of the vow of his separation there shall no razor come upon his head, until the days be fulfilled, in the which he separated himself unto the Lord. He shall be holy, and shall let the locks of his hair of his head grow. All the days that he separated himself unto the Lord, he shall come at no dead body. He shall not make himself unclean for his father or his mother, for his brother, for his sister, when they die, because the consecration of his God is upon his head. So they couldn't even attend the funeral of their relatives if their relatives died. All the days of the separation, he is holy unto the Lord. That's the vow of a Nazarite. Number 6 has other details concerning that. So, what did Jephthah do with his daughter? He kept his vow regarding that burnt offering, but since it involved his daughter, he couldn't burn her up, so he had to take that second option, which was to dedicate her to God. Now, we know that throughout the Word, human sacrifice was abhorrent to God and the Jews. It was a practice in pagan religion, because when things weren't going well among the pagan believers, they thought they could curry favor with their gods by the greatest form of sacrifice, which was human sacrifice. But you know what they did? When they did that, they usually sacrificed prisoners. That was a cheap price because they were expendable. But another more serious pagan practice was child sacrifice. Both were abominations. Look at Leviticus 18:21. Leviticus 18:21. And thou shalt not let any of thy seed pass through the fire to Molech. Neither shalt thou profane the name of thy God. I am the Lord. Archaeologists dug up statues of Molech that were brass with their arms held out, and they heated them up, and they put sacrifices on the arms until they died. And those sacrifices were children. Yuck. Deuteronomy 18:10. There shall not be found among you any one that maketh his son or his daughter to pass through the fire. That's what that ceremony was called. Or that uses divination, or an observer of times, or an enchanter, or a witch. So human sacrifice of children was as bad as everything else on that list. So there were two kinds of burnt offerings, not counting the pagan ones, all right? Well, which one was meant when God talked to Abraham? the belief that when God told Abraham to offer Isaac as a burnt offering, but Abraham misunderstood which one he meant, well, honestly, that idea is flawed. Yeah, there were two kinds of burnt offerings. God told Abraham to offer Isaac as a burnt offering. But, if God knew that Abe misunderstood, do you think God would have clarified? The other option was that Abraham did not misunderstand the revelation, that he actually did intend to offer and burn up Isaac. But then God intervened. So, what I said in my chronological development of this in 2023 was, quote, from what we've learned so far, I'm going to be honest with you in my thinking now, this could go either way. So that's why I said at that point. I also said I'm not going to tell you which way to think. I'm going to present the facts, let you mull about it, and you let me know. I mean, it's not the end of the world if we disagree on this, right? That's what I said. It's in my teaching notes. I was giving my audience latitude to weigh things and time to decide. But you know what? Now we know more. If Abraham misunderstood, well, what kind of a test would that have been? We know that human sacrifice is not effective anyway, because the humans that were being sacrificed all had sins of their own. There was only one, last Adam, who had no sin, and that could be effective, but he did not exist yet. And also we know that according to James 1:13, God does not tempt with evil. But there's another side of this if you look at the evidence. Look at Genesis 22. Genesis 22:2. God said, take now thy son, thine only son, Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains, which I will tell thee of. And Abraham rose up early in the morning, and saddled his ass, and took two of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and clave the wood for the burnt offering, and rose up, and went unto the place of which God had told him. Then on the third day Abraham lifted up his eyes, and saw the place far off. And Abraham said to his young men, abide ye here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship, and we will come again unto you. He did say that, we will come again unto you. It's first person plural in the Hebrew. So Abraham expected to come back with his son. Genesis 22:6. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it upon Isaac his son. He took the fire in his hand and a knife, and they went both of them together. And Isaac spoke unto Abraham his father and said, my father. And he said, here I am, my son. And he said, behold the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, my son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. So they went both of them together. And they came to the place which God had told him of, and Abraham built an altar there, laid the wood in order, and he bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched forth his hand and took the knife to slay his son. And the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven and said, whoa, 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 Abraham. And he said, here I am. And he said, lay not thine hand on the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou reverencest God, seeing that thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering in place of his son. And Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah Jireh, as it is said, to this day, in the mount of the Lord it shall be seen. So this was so special, it ranked in one of those Jehovah names, Jehovah Jireh. Wow. Abraham expected to come back again, it said, right, with Isaac, because he said to his servant, we will come back, first person plural. But do we know what Abraham's thought process was concerning that? Yes, I know there were two different opinions about this incident, but there's something more, because the clue that we're looking for is here in Hebrews, because it actually tells us Abraham's logic. Hebrews 11:19. Hebrews 11:19. Accounting, and that is the word logizomai, having reasoned. So, having reasoned, this was his thinking, that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from whence also he received him in a figure. The word received is komizo, to receive back. So, that was his thinking, you see? So, you know what? That pretty much proves one of the arguments and not the other, right? We've learned even more concerning this information about this section, because we've seen the second theme here in Hebrews 11 concerning their expectations, their rewards. The incident regarding Abraham and Isaac fits with that second theme of future rewards and resurrections. I think that this, quote-unquote, received him in a figure there in verse 19 is very interesting, because where did God tell Abraham to go? It says he told him to go to one of the mountains in the land of Moriah. Well, where is Mount Moriah? If you look at 2 Chronicles 3:1, Mount Moriah is in Jerusalem, where the temple was. In that area, there are a number of mountains or hills in the Moriah range. Jesus was crucified on Golgotha, which is one of the hills in the Moriah range. The temple was on another hill in the same range. So here, quote-unquote, in a figure, we have a portend, a prefigure of Jesus being sacrificed. In this class, we've seen that the book of Hebrews already has featured many types, antitypes, mysteries, and figures. Ren just pointed out a few more tonight. Well, this is one more. I know that God did not support human sacrifice, but Jesus was a human sacrifice, wasn't he? He was the only one that was legit. And what about God testing Abraham to see what he would do? God already knew what Abraham would do, because God has foreknowledge. But after that test, who knew? Well, Abraham knew that he passed the test, right? And Isaac knew that he passed the test. And also Isaac got to experience God firsthand with the angel, so I think that really locked Isaac in. So in 2023, I had said it could go either way. But we'd not had this class on the book of Hebrews. Back then, I was believing more information would come out that would convince me 100% either way. I even said so back then. Now, with this realization of the second theme here in Hebrews, and how this incident fits with the quote-unquote in the figure, it has come into focus for me. Yes, it was a test. Not with negative intent, because that's not what God does. It was something to prove or refine. Evidence, like Ren was talking about. And there definitely was a benefit, because afterwards, God expressed that promise again. He established it. Look at Genesis 22:15. Genesis 22:15. And the angel of the Lord called unto Abraham out of the heaven the second time, and said, By myself have I sworn, saith the Lord. We read about that in Hebrews earlier. For because thou hast done this thing, and hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore, and thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. Why? Because thou hast obeyed my voice. Was Isaac dedicated to God as a temple servant? If he were to be dedicated to God the second way, why did God say this here? Abraham didn't misunderstand. He obeyed. So, there's even more to consider, because there's a connection of this to the book of James. That's a book written to the same audience. Look at James 2:14. James 2:14. What doth it profit, my brethren, though a man may say he hath faith, and have not works? Can faith save him? This question actually characterizes a basic difference between Greek thinking and Semitic thinking. As Edwin Hatch wrote in his book, The Influence of Greek Ideas Upon Christianity, the Greeks were more concerned with what do you believe. The Semitic concern was what are you going to do about what you believe. This then in James 2 is concrete evidence of that Semitic mindset. James 2:15. If a brother or sister be naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you say to him, Oh, depart in peace, ye be warmed and filled, I'm believing for you. Notwithstanding, you give them not those things which are needful to the body, there's no corresponding action to your believing. What does it profit? Even so, believing, if it doesn't have corresponding action, is dead, being alone. Yea, a man may say, you have believing, and I have corresponding action. Show me your believing without your corresponding action. And I will show you my believing by my corresponding action. We know that believing and corresponding action are connected. One influences the other. That goes both ways. One can be believing by taking corresponding action. Like I say, when praying for rain, bring an umbrella. And in the other direction, believing is expressed by corresponding action. Then James 2:19 goes on. It says, Thou believes there is one God. Well, whoopee fizz. The devils also believe and tremble. But wilt thou know, O vain man, that believing without corresponding action is dead? Of all the possible examples, then, right now in James, this incident of Abraham and Isaac is cited. In the past, when I taught this subject in James, while I was still of the former opinion, I taught that even though Abraham was initially taking the wrong action based on his assumption, he was still believing because he was acting, and so God was able to steer him to the proper conclusion. I illustrated that by the expression, it's a lot easier to steer a car when it's moving than when it's standing still. But you know what here? James, in chapter 2, was not implying that Abraham was taking wrong action. Verse 21, was not Abraham our father justified by works, corresponding action, when he offered Isaac his son upon the altar? See how faith, believing, wrought with his corresponding action, and by corresponding action was his believing made perfect, teleao. The Greek in verse 22 says that the believing was working with his action, not against it. So by means of the action was his faith brought to fulfillment, teleao. That's what it was saying. Verse 23, and the scripture was fulfilled which saith, Abraham believed God, and it was imputed unto him for righteousness, and he was called the friend of God. Ye see then how that by works, corresponding action, a man is justified, and not by believing only. So, Abraham's test was not conceptual, it was actual. And he didn't fail the test, he passed. Therefore, after all this careful deliberation, I think I can safely say that I do not any longer support the conclusion that was in that chapter 8 of the Word's Way. It's only presenting one of the options. But there in that Word's Way chapter 8, it doesn't even cite Hebrews 11:17 through 19. It still is true that the term burnt offering has more than one meaning, but we've weighed the options. I think that the clues left in both Hebrews 11 and James 2 specify the intent that Abraham had. He was obedient to the revelation, and he was so convinced that he thought that if he killed Isaac, that God would raise him from the dead. That's literally what Hebrews 11 says. Hebrews 11:19, accounting, logizomai, having reasoned that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from whence also he received him in a figure. So, now I leave this matter to you to consider. The fact that we believe one way or the other doesn't make us superior or inferior, because that would be misusing truth. We're just letting the Word have its way. Now, the rest of this great chapter unfolds as it continues to illustrate its two themes, believing and rewards. Hebrews 11:20 goes on now. Hebrews 11:20, by faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. There's the theme again. By faith Jacob, when he was dying, blessed both the sons of Joseph and worshipped, leaning upon the top of his staff. That actually fits with the second theme, because Jacob adopted his grandsons, Ephraim and Manasseh, so they could inherit equally with the rest of his sons. So inheritance fits right with that theme. The double blessing, which usually went to the firstborn, in this case, Jacob's firstborn was Joseph with his wife Rachel. And so that double blessing was split between Joseph's two sons. Hebrews 11:22. By faith Joseph, when he died, made mention of the departing of the children of Israel and gave commandment concerning his bones. He was looking forward. By faith Moses, when he was born, was hid 3 months of his parents because they saw he was a gifted child, and they were not afraid of the king's commandment. By faith Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the adopted son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. Well, what's that imply? He was expecting reward. Esteeming the reproach, that is, the reproach in the eyes of the Egyptians, of Christ. So he was looking forward to Christ and all the blessings and didn't care what the Egyptians thought, because it was greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. There's your second theme. So verse 26 fits perfectly with the second theme of Hebrews 11. So these incidents that were chosen in Hebrews 11 for this list were chosen for a dual purpose, and probably even some more, as Ren brought out. They exemplified believing, and they also illustrated looking forward to reward. Hebrews 11:27. By faith Moses forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. Who was that? He was looking forward to Christ, as it says in verse 26. Through faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, lest he that destroyed the firstborn should touch them. By faith they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, which the Egyptians trying to do were drowned. By faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they were compassed about 7 days. By faith the harlot, the innkeeper, Rahab, perished not with them that believed not, when she had received the spies with peace. And what more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and of Barak and of Samson and of Jephthah and David also and Samuel and of the prophets, who, through believing, subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, grew valiant in fight, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead raised to life again, and others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection, like we saw in last session. And others had trial of cruel mockings and scourgings, yea, moreover of bonds and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were tempted, they were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destituted, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and all that stuff, and in mountains and dens and caves of the earth. And these all, having obtained a good report, as Ren brought out, through believing, received not the promise, God having provided something better for us, who, those Hebrews, they were trying to convince that they without us should not be made perfect. So, now we see the purpose of Hebrews 11, which is in the practical application section of Hebrews. It was a powerful incentive for the Hebrews to believe correctly and receive the corresponding rewards. That is confirmed by the next, quote-unquote, let us statement. Hebrews 12:1. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. This was yet another call to action, a salvo against unbelief, an encouragement reaching out to those of Hebrew background who knew these Old Testament accounts so well, to the saving of their souls, by bringing out that expectation for reward as well, and looking forward to what now had indeed come to pass, because Jesus Christ, the Son of God, had fulfilled prophecies, exemplified the types that were lauded in Scripture, being the antitype, the fulfillment, the things that they had been looking for. So, Hebrews, this was your best opportunity to believe, your day of visitation, and your means of reward. Bless you.